Thank you very much for that. I'm glad to see everybody's listening. I got to say, before we start on the next one, Scott and I were talking. There's something special here. I got to tell you, last year I did 522 speaking events. I was in 522 communities in 365 days, and I'm not doing that again. But out of all the presentations I have done for all the years that I've been doing this, I've never quite felt the energy in a room that you guys have. You're very fortunate to have something like the Dane Hansen Foundation, but the Dane Hansen Foundation is very fortunate to have a room full of people that can help actualize what the vision for your communities are. So thank you for letting me participate. Okay, so instead of dropping my cue cards on the table, I was going to hold them, but I've also, since I've turned 50, I've realized my arms aren't as long as they need to be. So I'm going to do my best because I wrote down a couple of particular stories that I want to make sure that I share with you, okay? So this one requires no big introduction. We're just going to get started. Although I do want to emphasize, when I started this morning, it was about the mindsets that sabotage our success and about how we undermine our communities with our presentations. This is not an actual mirror image of that, but this is built or based on the future, the present, how things are changing. Now, I've been doing this presentation for a long time, and I have to admit that it's only been reinforced by the pandemic, by the challenges our communities have faced through the pandemic. These things have only become more true. And I also, one more thing you need to know, it's not only 13 pathways. I've picked 13 different areas to talk about, but they are limitless. Just like 13 ways to kill your community, I have another 13 ways we could do someday, but so there's not just 13 different ways. So these are meant to instigate some ideas, and I think they're going to help reinforce what Scott and Marcy talked about earlier this afternoon, okay? So let's get rolling. There we go, okay. All right. If I actually write another 13 ways to kill your community, the first one I would put in the second edition of the book is don't have broadband and connectivity. Because frankly, water was chapter 1. We know how important, how critically important water is to our communities. In Canada, I know you guys have some investments that are going into broadband and high-speed internet now, but in Canada, broadband has actually been declared an essential service, and it was declared so before the pandemic. The pandemic just reminded us just how much of an essential service broadband is. A lot of kids were pushed to do education online because they couldn't go to school. A lot of post-secondary students went and worked online. In fact, programs and operating systems like Linda, you can get a PhD online now. You can access any post-secondary institution, well, anyone that's connected to the internet now to help you get educated. And so, I mean, that's just education. We saw with healthcare how much the world had to change. Being in Canada, we have a great universal healthcare system, but it's also somewhat restrictive. So trying to innovate in our healthcare system is sometimes a challenge. We pay doctors for a doctor's visit. They get paid so much for every visit every 15 minutes. And so for a long time, I had suggested as a former politician, we need to change the system, because why do I have to go see the doctor to get a prescription renewed? Why can't I just call in and get it renewed? It's a waste of both of our times. No, we can't do that. Doctors refused to do it because they didn't get paid. The government refused to pay them for something like that, so it couldn't be innovated. And then the pandemic hit, and we couldn't go into the doctor's office. And ta-da! Now you can get a prescription just calling in. And so you can do so much more stuff online around healthcare. We saw seniors and semi-retirees socializing and visiting with their grandkids over as long as they had broadband services. We've learned to utilize the internet so much more because we had to in the last few years with the pandemic. So now if you're thinking about a pathway forward for your community, I have seen communities leverage that. They said, we have broadband connectivity, high-speed internet, but don't sell that. It's kind of like the water example earlier. Great, you have broadband. That's not the marketing technique. What you can do with the broadband is what you need to sell. The style of life, the quality of life. One of the best campaigns I saw coming out of the pandemic was from one of our provinces, Nova Scotia. I wish I had put some of the ads up there, but they had an ad of a whale jumping out in the ocean and a guy on the beach sitting in a chair with a computer on his lap. And he said, and the advertisement underneath said, yeah, so your town has an aquarium. Right? That's great. And they invested in connectivity and broadband to make that a reality. So they were selling the kind of life you could have now that you could access the entire world. There are communities right now that are marketing free internet, free broadband downtown. And they're not just advertising that it's free downtown, they're leveraging it. A great community, which I'll probably bring up a couple of times because it's a tiny little community. It's smaller than the one I live in, and I live in a community of 600 people. It's smaller than that. Actually marketed that broadband downtown, marketed to people to come to do some Christmas shopping, and there's a lot of other things that brought people downtown. And then they had walking paths, so you could connect broadband free on Main Street and walk around looking at some of the history, finding out some of the history of the buildings, doing some tourism experiences. You could even walk up to the store and based on your location, could find out what sales were on in that store for Christmas shopping. Like they were utilizing the broadband, and it drew people from Toronto, which was an hour away. I mean, what is it? 3 million people or 4 million? I don't live in Toronto. I don't go there. It's millions of people coming out to this small little community, smaller than mine, because of the experience and because of the broadband, the connectivity that they had. So that's a definite pathway forward and something you need to utilize because, you know, unless you're like my dad, who used to jokingly say, at least I think he was joking, he used to say, I think these computers are just a fad, right? Broadband is not going to go away, and it is now such an essential service and a marketing strategy for your community. All of these are marketing strategies. Number two, having the honors degree in philosophy. I always try and sneak something in about this. Aristotle said, know yourself. That is one of the most critical elements. But I am frustrated and shocked by how many communities don't know themselves. They do strategic plans, like I talked about before, that try and be like everybody else or try and be amazing, but they don't actually help you discover what makes you unique. To us, if you want to know yourself, you have several questions you need to ask. And I've got another presentation about the 7 essential things every community needs to do. You start with the end to know yourself. Who is interested in your community? What people and what businesses would want to come there? That's the end goal, is to attract new people, to attract new businesses. Well, you need to know who you are, what makes you unique and what makes you great in order to do that successfully. I can't tell you how many communities I've been to and they say, you know what? This unmanned aerial vehicle thing is really catching on. We're gonna try and attract a center for that. And I can't tell you how many of them don't even have an airport. How are you gonna do unmanned vehicles when you don't have an airport? They're trying to be something that they're not. So think about who really would be interested in your community. What people, what businesses, what investments, and why would they come? And then you go back to the beginning and you assess your community and say, what really does make us stand out and make us strong? And as long as you can go through, engage the public so they own it, make sure that you have a strategy that is focused on getting things done, a budget that supports that strategy, and then a marketing campaign and a brand that complements that, then by the end, when you know who you are, you know what you're selling to people. So if I know exactly what makes me amazing, then I can tell someone else, you know what my strengths are, you know, my assets are. This is why you want to go on a date with me. Treat it like dating. I'm serious. You know how many communities I hear say, well, you know what, we really just need to get some here and we need to get them now. That's like walking into a bar and saying, hey, want to get married? Why don't we get to know each other a little bit first? Tell me about you and why I should be with you. That's the dating process. But you need to know who you are without the lies, without covering up who it is you really are. There's a lot that do that. I call this the lies we tell ourselves. And there's a lot of them. And I didn't bring the card that has the statistics on it, but I remember this when I was a junior high teacher. I loved this student. He was absolutely wonderful and he wanted to be a sports broadcaster. He loved hockey, football, soccer, all of it. Wanted to be a sports broadcaster. So we went through, he was in grade 7. We're going to find out, you know, what you need to do to become a sports broadcaster. Now, he was determined that's what he wanted to be. He didn't like public speaking, he didn't like talking, and he didn't like crowds. It's like, maybe you should reevaluate what it is you want to do. And he said, no, I want to be a sportscaster. There was a serious disconnection between what he wanted, but a lot of communities keep doing that. You need to know who you are. Otherwise, you have no idea who you are selling to or what you're selling them. So if you know yourself, you're going to find your pathway forward. Number 3, Main Street, downtown. Oop, that was the one I was on. So I got to give you a little bit of a history of the suburbs. Okay, and I'm sorry, I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but I want to take you back to the 1950s. I wasn't there. I'm not that old. But I want to take you back a little bit to the 1950s, okay? In the 1950s, our communities were vibrant and robust. Even in the 70s, when I was really young, I would go downtown in my hometown. There were people everywhere. There were vehicles everywhere, walking up and down the street, socializing. Even in the evening, there were people there. And that's because back then, excuse me, we had people, businesses on Main Street at the main floor, and above them, people lived. And so there was always a group of people downtown. There were always vehicles. There was always socialization opportunities. And then we did the same thing. I mean, we call it the American dream, but it's all of our same dream. In the 50s, discovered the suburbs, agriculture plots of land outside of town that we could buy really, really cheap and build a house and put a white picket fence around it. And yeah, this is wonderful. And everybody was really excited about it. Except as that 20-year transition happened and more people moved out to the suburbs, it killed our downtowns. Because that people would say when they got home, let's go downtown and have supper. And the other partner would say, I don't want to go downtown. Let's just stay here. We've got a big screen TV in the basement. Let's cocoon. You know, they didn't say it, but that's what they were doing. Hiding out in the basement, hiding out in the backyard. Our big screen TVs got big and our front porches got smaller until they disappeared. So everybody went out to the suburbs. No one came in back downtown after work was done at 5 o'clock. And that's the challenge, because what meal is the most prosperous meal for a restaurant to run? They make over 50% of their profit from the supper time meal, because you tend to have the biggest meal then and you have a glass of wine or a beer or something. Well, that's where they make their money. When no one came back downtown, those restaurants weren't viable anymore, and more of them closed down until you had cafes that served lunch and 50-cent coffees. And that worked for us for the next 40 years, except they started to die off too. And now our downtowns are no longer social places. They're now commodity centers. Instead of coming down and socializing like an active hub, we sent everybody to the suburbs, and downtown now is a place where you pull up, walk in, grab your stuff, go back to your vehicle and drive away. And then we wonder why our downtowns are dying. So if you're going to help your community find a pathway to success, reinvesting in Main Street and having a rebirth is incredibly important. One of my favorite stories was from Craig, Colorado. When we were there doing some work, we pulled, I think they said there were 32 different groups there, almost 100 people, to share their strategies and what they needed to do. The idea was that they had 32 different organizations all going in different directions, and they didn't know what each other were doing. So we pulled them together, showed them each other's strategic plan, pulled them all up so that, and some of them were volunteer groups. So a volunteer group would say, our project needs to be done. Another volunteer group would say, no, our project needs to be done. And instead of all competing for the same grant, they decided which project had to be done first, which would come second, which would come third, and then they coordinated their efforts to make it more efficient and effective. But one of the coolest things that we didn't intend to come out of there was that the town had a plot of land downtown, a vacant lot. There was an old building there they tore down, they reconditioned it, hoping somebody would buy it and put up a building, and nobody did. Meanwhile, the college had land on the outskirts of town. And so when they sat there and talked about their future plans and what they were going to do, the college said, we want to build a residence. And the town said, we need a place to store our equipment. And instead of storing the equipment on Main Street in the vacant lot and having the college residents on the outskirts of town, they switched their land. And the college residents went downtown, and the vacant lot needed for equipment went on the outskirts of town. And you know what happened? They called me later and said, we had a library, we had a brew pub, and a restaurant open up within 6 months of the college students being downtown. That's how much of an impact it made. Just doing something to reinvigorate their Main Street. Another one of my favorite examples is from a little town called Hanna. It's got 3,500 people. The community is about an hour and a half, 2 hours from Calgary, a population of 1 million people. I remember we worked with them for a year to get them to talk about investing in the community, changing the story. And everyone finally bought in and was really excited about it. They said, this is great, we're going to do it. Except the city manager. Well, I hope he doesn't watch this. The city manager said, you know what, Doug, we're losing 250 jobs because they're closing the power plant. We just need to attract a business that creates 250 more jobs, right? I said, that's great, but every time someone loses a job, they move away. You don't have 250 unemployed people. And then he said, but we've got $7 million in the bank. I was like, are you retiring as a town? And I walked him outside and showed him, because it was evening, and half the streetlights were burnt out, and half the businesses were vacant. Like, it looked like no one was in that community at all. And there were 3,500 people there. And he said, yeah, I see your point. So they invested and bought a bunch of buildings and tore them down, those vacant ones. And the reason why, because it still connects to the 50s, a lot of our buildings were built then. And at that time, you needed 3,000 square feet or 4,000 square feet. Because if you had a shoe store, you needed 500 square feet for the showroom, and the shoes were in the back. We warehoused stuff. A lot of our businesses are like that. Now the average requirement for a business on Main Street is 800 to 1,000 square feet. So who wants to buy an old building like that, use a quarter of the space, but still pay to heat the whole thing and renovate it when it's really old and maybe not so fit for business? So we've got a lot of main streets that look horrific. And every single time I have people say, we just need to attract some new businesses here. And my response to them is, if you're not going to invest in your own main street, why would anybody else? It's up to you to help recondition it and get it started and to reinvigorate it. That will lead to a downtown Main Street rebirth, and that is a pathway to success. Number 4, housing. These all kind of pile on each other. Number 4, housing diversity and availability. I mentioned to you before about the condition with moving everyone out to the suburbs. Yet I still see communities all the time that say, oh, we're going to attract a developer and we're going to build a new subdivision. And I ask them what it's like. The subdivision they're going to build. Same answer every time. 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-car garage. It's going to be great. I look at them and say, okay, how many of you sold? Well, none. But we're working on it. We've got a few vacant houses. We're ready to go. So I do a thought experiment with them. Where are people coming from that are moving to those houses? Well, they're coming from an hour down the road, halfway across the country. It doesn't matter. They're a family and they're moving here. I say, okay, what is it like where they're at? And they always describe the same thing to me. Well, they're a family and they have jobs and their kids are in school and they're part of the community. And right. Why would they move to your community just because you have a vacant piece of land now? Like, I don't get it. Are people actually, do we think that people are driving around with all their stuff in the back of a truck just looking for a vacant piece of land? They already live somewhere. If you want to grow your community, instead of trying to find an established family and drawing them from somewhere else because you have a vacant piece of land and an empty house, why not instead start attracting people who are looking for a different type of life, like maybe semi-retirees or young professionals before they meet someone, before they get married, before they have kids. There's plenty of opportunities. I mean, the pandemic confirmed again that we can work not just from home, but we can work from anywhere. But we need diversity in our housing if we're going to address that. I mean, there are lots of young professionals that would like to buy a 1 or 2 or 3-bedroom condo or apartment. There are a lot of young professionals that don't want to own a house at all. In fact, the younger generation is now being called the rental generation. One, they can't afford it. My kids gave me a plaque when I turned 50 a few months ago. Yeah, I've said that multiple times. I'm just looking for a little sympathy. So they gave me a plaque, and it was what happened in the year 1972 in Alberta, Canada. And it's about the same everywhere. I mean, it varies a little bit, but the margins are similar. The average salary in Alberta in 1972 was $13,000 a year, just over $13,000 a year. The average house price was just under $28,000. It's just a little bit over double what you made in a year. Now, what is it, 4 or 5 or 6 times what we make if you have a good paying job? And I'm just going to say this on behalf of millennials everywhere. Boomers who complain that they drink too much Starbucks and that's why they can't afford a house, cut off Starbucks for your whole life. That's not enough money to make a down payment on a house. That's not the issue. The world has changed dramatically. And so when you're looking to attract younger people, think about 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments they can rent. Because not only do they not necessarily want to buy the house, they can't afford it, they don't necessarily want to buy it either. They're used to a big world. They've been exposed to it all on the internet. There's a whole world out there. And so lots of them would like to go to California for a few months and do some skiing. Then they might decide they want to be in New York City for 3 years until they get sick of that. Then they may decide they want the history and culture that comes with one of the founding states of the entire country in Kansas. Like they want some mobility and some flexibility and some opportunities. Then when you have 500 of them go through, if you can get 5 of them to stay, eventually they'll move into those 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom, 2 car garage homes. But if you only have those, you're actually shutting them out of the housing market, and you're missing the point. Also, this connects to the previous slide with downtown. We need to stop building all the housing on the outskirts. We need mixed-use residential and commercial space in our cores, so bring housing back downtown. All of the successful communities I have seen in the last several years have all brought housing down into their core so that it creates a feeling of life, a feeling of energy, and brings people back down. And I'll tell you, there's nothing more that millennials and the generations that are younger than them want more than socialization. That actually came up in the conversation that Marcy ran, right? So if you want a pathway forward, focus on housing and housing diversity and affordability. Sorry, I write down too many stories. I'm like, no, I don't have time for that. Number 5, beautification and experiences. These things go hand in hand. So I ask people this question when we do consulting with communities all the time. Where do you like to go on holidays? Or what's a community you admire? Describe it to me and describe why you like it. I have yet to find a single person that describes a community that isn't attractive and great places to eat. And I've discovered something from all of my travels, and I've been all over the world. I can't believe how much I talk about food. No, people say, oh, you were in China twice. Oh, you were all over Europe. You've been in Portugal. You've been in Africa. You've been in South America. And I'm like, yeah, you should have. We were at this restaurant and we had this. People talk about food because it is an experience. I talk about the aesthetics. I talk about the feel of the community. I don't actually remember a lot of stuff we did, but I remember in China, in Shanghai, the amount of space that was on the sidewalks given the number of people. I remember being in Japan and the lack of space on the sidewalks. They have a subway. Sorry, I'm going to tell you a quick story. If you've been to Tokyo, you go to the subway, you take it underground. They actually have streetlights underground. So people walk, they walk very uniformly. And so I kind of felt like I was in very uniformly, red light, and the next group goes through a different tunnel so that it's not a mess. It was crazy. But that was one of the stories, those experiences. Beautification and experiences is something that helps draw us all in. And it works for business examples too. Beautification, the aesthetics. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the A&W recovery story. A&W, the burger place, they were almost broke, or they were having a lot of challenges for the longest time. And the new CEO of the company came up with an idea. And they interviewed him. I remember watching it on W5. How did you turn the company around? And you know what his answer was? Clean bathrooms. No word of a lie. Because you've all driven, you've seen multiple fast food places. Well, it's a little sexist. It's an older story back from the late 90s. But they asked him, he said, when a family's driving down the street and they see all these fast food place choices, we knew that they say, where do you want to eat? The husband says, I don't care. Where do you want to eat? And the wife says, the place with the cleanest bathrooms because I've got to clean the kids up and I don't want. And so that is what helped turn the restaurant around. Little things like that. And we've walked down main streets where I can tell you, you could blindfold me and take me into a community, put me on Main Street, and I can tell you whether or not that community is on the uptrend or downtrend, no matter what it looks like now, based on how clean or dirty the windows and the businesses are. That's true. I know it sounds sad, but it's true. We were in community, my business partner Heather and I, we were doing an evaluation of 10 businesses as part of a program. 10 businesses. So the town picked the businesses we were going to evaluate, and we went in, and there was a flower shop. Now, when we got into the flower shop, we're walking by. I actually didn't realize we walked by it once because I thought it was closed. The windows were so dirty. There was old shelves in the window with carpet on them that looked like the frames were still off, and there were plastic flowers in the window. It was a flower shop. But plastic flowers covered with dust. And we walked by it. I thought, well, this can't be it. And then we realized it was and went in and talked to the owner. And the owner, in the midst of the pandemic, said, okay, the town is paying for this for me, so I can do an evaluation. And they were even going to give them some money to help with frontage improvements. But he said they should just give me a check because I'm not making business decisions based on what you or they tell me. That's fair enough, but they're not going to cut you a check. You have to make changes. And he said, forget it. Now, this is in the midst of the pandemic when flower shops bloomed. Like, you get the double entendre there? They blossomed. Okay, we'll try that one. They did really, really well. And it was amazing how well they did. I mean, Home Depot was going to close 11 different places until the pandemic hit, and they were scheduled to be closed. And then everyone during the pandemic was like, well, I guess we're not going to Hawaii. Let's do the basement renovations. And they made more money than they ever had. Same with flower shops. Because I can tell you, I'm one of those guys that during the pandemic, being cooped up with my wife and family, I bought a lot of flowers. It was really important. I'm also the kind of guy that generally wouldn't think about it until I walk by a flower shop and I see the flowers, fresh flowers in the window. I'm like, I'm going to take those home. But he didn't have those. He had plastic flowers in the window. And when we made the recommendations, he said no. And in the time when flower shops did better business than they have in the last 100 years, he went broke because he refused to wash the windows, change the shelving, and put fresh cut flowers in the front. Beautification experiences. You know, the experience is the other side of the flower shop. There's a guy he was concerned about his flower shop business in Edmonton. And so he created a little bit of a program. You got a bundle of flowers, not put together nicely, just a bunch of them, delivered to your house for a lot of money, plus a bottle of wine. And then you join him online live, and he showed you how to cut them and make your own vase. He ran out once people caught on, the moment he started to release them, he was sold out within 5 minutes. He couldn't keep up and he couldn't grow fast enough. Now people aren't doing it as much, but the experiences in beautification is definitely a pathway forward. Number 6, entrepreneurship and small business. I'm always impressed by the number of communities that say we need a big business here, right? Let's attract a big business that'll create 200 jobs. Like, we're the only ones that thought of that in this room. Everyone would love to have an industry or big business show up and create a couple hundred jobs. That's fantastic. Good luck with that. Because everybody's pursuing the same thing. Unmanned vehicles, even though you don't have an airport kind of stuff, right? Well, we're missing one of the most valuable assets that our communities have, and that's local entrepreneurship and local businesses already. I have said, and I think it's in the book, I don't know why towns don't, instead of the sign that says, please come again, we hope to see you again, whatever the you're leaving town sign says, why not put up a sign, this is a metaphor, no, don't literally do this, okay? Why don't they put up a sign that says, hey, you're leaving town, which means we could use this new business in town, because obviously you're going to shop elsewhere. And find out what business is missing in your community. You don't need a home run with every at-bat. What you need is a lot of little first base hits, and that will win you the game. But most of the time, we're going after the home run. You can assess your businesses in your community and do an inventory about where they get their supplies from. I found 3 communities so far, just in the little bit of research that I did, that the first business that opened up was one that supplied a bunch of the other businesses in the community and in the region. Everyone was ordering stuff off Amazon, or I'm using Amazon as an example, but ordering stuff online to bring it in when they could have had that business right there in their community. And as soon as they identified they needed it, they said, oh, this is a great idea. In fact, the stats I have in the research I've done so far say that between 11 and 23% of every local economy is home-based businesses. Home-based businesses that if they grew just a little bit more might need an employee and might need a space on Main Street. I mean, think about that. If you could convert 10% of that 23%, your economy's already grown by 2.3%, and all you did was move someone from their garage or their basement onto Main Street, a home-based business. They're absolutely remarkable opportunities. So, one story I wanted to share with you, this recruitment for entrepreneurship and small businesses can be done in multiple ways. A community that I very much appreciate is called Winkler. And in this community, they grew their population from just under 5,000 people to just over 10,000 people in the space of 11 years. They had the same mayor the whole time that they did it. And I was curious about how they did it, so I went and interviewed him. And he said he and the president of the Chamber of Commerce interviewed every grade 12 student every single year to find out what they wanted to be. And there were some that said, I have a trade or a skill, I want to go to school for this. And they put those all together and said, does that add up to some industry or business we can go get? Because if we get that business, those kids can come home after they've gone exploring, right? And that's how they did their economic development. But they also found a lot of young people that said they wanted to be entrepreneurs, they wanted to be business owners. And one of the fascinating things he said was that when they talked to the business owners on Main Street, half of them were going to retire in the next few years. And when he asked them, what are you going to do with your business? They all looked at him and went, golfing. No, what are you going to do with your business? And they all looked baffled and basically shrugged their shoulders and said, lock the door and cancel my lease. What do you mean? There was no Main Street business succession planning. And they started to marry up, not literally, that's against the law, but they started to marry up these young entrepreneurs interested in business opportunities and these businesses that had no succession plan. And one of the success stories was a little ladies' clothing shop owned by an older lady who was getting close to retirement. 2 young ladies in high school at the time said they wanted to open a clothing shop. They wanted to be entrepreneurs, so they connected them. And they transformed this place. They put on copper tin on the ceiling, and they thinned it out, like so it wasn't a department. I don't know all the stuff about that. Heather does, but I don't. But they did a lot of changes and improvements, brought it onto Instagram, and now she's retired, and they're still buying it from her. Maybe they have it paid off now. But this little business, which is absolutely remarkable, went from 3,000 people on Instagram when we met them to over 25,000 people now on Instagram. And they sell more of their clothes online than they do on the street. And they have clients from all over the United States. That first lady who owned the business never would have thought of that. She didn't understand the technology. She didn't understand how she could grow. They did, and they both succeeded because of that. Her business became valuable and bought, and they got to be in their hometown on Main Street. If you want to see the Instagram account, it's Grace and Glam. Just go on Instagram and look up Grace and Glam. You can see what they do, and you can buy clothes there. They have famous celebrities now buying their clothes. It's pretty cool. And so you see, instead of trying to go for the home run and attract a business everyone's competing for, local entrepreneurship, local small businesses are the perfect pathway to help grow your community. Number 7, socialization and events. Sometimes it kind of connects to beautification, but it's not completely about that. Socialization and events is more than just some of the meat and potatoes that happens downtown. You remember I talked about the urbanization, the urbanization, moving out to the suburbs, suburbanization. See, thank you. Do you want to come with me in the next presentation? I'm getting older now. Suburbanization, and it killed our downtowns. A lot of communities are reinvigorating their downtowns or their communities with more socialization and events. And there are many, many different ways to do it. In fact, one thing that we found is that some communities are utilizing socialization events to bring people to the community as a marketing strategy. Excuse me. Thank you. I'll just spill it all over the place. Just go there. Thank you very much. So they're doing it to bring people down to the community. And I didn't realize how effective it was until we did a survey. And it was just across Canada, but generally you guys are pretty much the same. When we asked people where they lived, first we asked them if they lived in their hometown. If they said yes, then we scooted them away. We went to the rest of them and said, now you don't live in your hometown. How did you find the community you live in now? 31% said it was from an accidental tourism experience across Canada. They went to an event to watch a concert or to a barbecue or to some street fair or a farmer's market or some sort of event, and they went another time because they had a lot of fun. And it was a connected community. And then they started to say, this is really cool. I could live here. And that helped attract new people. You can't just bring them there and then not sell them on what you've got. You need to connect the dots. Like post-pandemic, so many communities are having reunions, right? We're going to have a reunion and bring everybody home. It's going to be a glorious thing. I've been to lots of reunions. Sometimes they're not even mine, but there's a good party there. And I have discovered that they'll have the reunion and everyone will get drunk and go to the dance and they'll all socialize in the corners and stuff. And then they all go home. Not one community I found yet that says, hey, you used to be from here. Did you know we have new business opportunities on Main Street? We have a growing community. We have new development opportunities. We've got new housing. You've got thousands of people that come home from a reunion and you don't do one single thing to remind them that that's a good place to be and maybe they could come home now. And so when outsiders come, it's the same sort of thing. If they come to show up for the experience, why not do a little bit of marketing and communication to remind them of exactly what's possible? Now, it's not always going to work, but there are great things you can do. Fires on Main Street. I don't mean the buildings, I mean fire pits, right? Just don't want anybody going around starting fires on storefronts and saying Doug told me to. But I've seen communities who have fires on Main Street and live music down at the end of the street in the evening in November or October. And people come from all around. A little community called Raymond. It's a little community. Bought one of those blow-up big screen, drive-in movie theater type of screens. You can get them. So they bought one, and every month they have a new live music concert. They had Bon Jovi. Bon Jovi was playing live in New Jersey, but they bought tickets. You could subscribe, and then they played it live on Raymond's Main Street. It was amazing. And Raymond's Main Street's pretty cool. It's really wide, like 4 times as wide as this building, because they used to have to turn the wagons around, and it took a long time with the horses, right? So we've got lots of wide Main Street. So they set out chairs, they put up some fires, they had vendors out, they sold some clothes, they sold winter stuff, there were people selling hot chocolate, there was a little bit of wine, and then Bon Jovi live on the screen. They had people drive for over 150 miles to come because there was no other way to watch. And it was like being at the concert. People with their t-shirts and they said that was the number one time, that first concert when they did Bon Jovi, the number one time, or the most requests they ever had to their real estate agents about moving to that community. It actually generated new activity. Now, that doesn't mean it's all going to be good. I do have to share one bad story. There's a community, it's outside of Calgary. It has 14,000 people. And this community is only half an hour at the most outside of Calgary. We helped them do a marketing strategy, and I'll talk about marketing on another slide, but it was very targeted to 4 neighborhoods in Calgary where people there couldn't afford to live there and didn't want to live there. And we thought this is the perfect time because I don't know if you guys know the stat, but in most cities, about 50% of people have never actually been outside city limits. So they fly from one city to another, but they don't get to smaller communities. And so we said, market to them, close off Main Street, because they had about 300 people that came to Main Street on any given Saturday. That's how busy it was. Or not busy, it was. At 300 people. We said, close it off. We're going to get you live music. We're going to have a movie night for the kids down at the other end. We're going to have some some activities for them to do. It's going to be great. All day on Saturday, close it off. And they were like, this is exciting. We're really excited. So we marketed it. They had over 13,000 people within 5 blocks that were blocked off on a Saturday afternoon. They had more calls to real estate agents and to the town inquiring about business opportunities, vacancies on Main Street, how their economy was doing, what sort of houses were available, what the schools were like, than they've ever had in the weeks following. And then they didn't do it again. You know why they didn't do it again? Because business owners on Main Street said, I need a place for people to park. I'm not joking. They did. And you'll hear that irrational wait. They even had golf carts set up to drive people who weren't very mobile to the business they needed on Main Street. But the business owners, for the most part, said, I want people to park in front of my business. They went from 300 people a Saturday to 13,000, and then they stopped because it's a change. We like to drive. We like to park. We like to buy our stuff and leave. And that's the way we're going to keep doing things. And they wonder why they're still suffering. So no matter what you do with socialization events and many of these other things, be prepared that you will have NIMBYs, bananas, nopes, cave people, and fears, and they will push you to stop. But this is a pathway to success. Number 8, cooperation and collaboration. There are 3 things that turn people off collaboration and cooperation. I'm really glad you talked about that today, because it's autonomy, the sense of a loss of autonomy, being able to control your own community. No one's going to tell you what to do. The loss of power, meaning you're going to own it yourself. And identity. And identity is a powerful force. In fact, do you know what everyone's favorite word in the English language is, or any language? We all have the same one. What's that? No? Your name. Your name. If I'm on a beach in Mexico and I hear someone say, hey, Doug, first thing I'm going to check is, I'm not doing anything bad, right? And then the second thing I'm going to be like, hey, somebody knows me. This is great. In the top 10 of our favorite words in our language is our town, our community, what we're part of. I mean, if someone hollers at me and goes, hey, Doug, from Ardrossan, I'm like, that's a double good thing as long as I'm not doing something bad. I'm like, this is great. I have been to communities that are working on collaboration and cooperation. This is no word of a lie. This is part of the conspiracy theory or the many conspiracy theories that we seem to be so quick to jump onto these days. I was in that community and they were talking about a regional economic development strategy. And the rumor going around town was that if we sign this agreement, I've already heard they're coming to take our town sign down. I even heard that they're going to burn our books, take them out of the library and burn our history books. No, they're not. Like that's ludicrous. But I couldn't believe how many people in the community bought into that. And because we seem to be prone to jumping towards fear these days and the worst case scenario and the worst story we can possibly imagine. And so when someone is compromising our identity, our autonomy, and our power, we get afraid and we pull back. And yet there are so many in, which story? Oh yeah. The challenge with that, I don't have a story for this one, but I do have something else I want to tell you. The challenge with that is that every community I find, especially smaller ones, have someone that does payroll, someone that does maintenance, someone that does administrative stuff. And yet I bet I could pull 20 communities together that all have that bare minimum workforce. No one's doing marketing or economic development because they can't afford it. And yet, when we talk about regional marketing and economic development, the idea is to grow the pie, to attract new people. And yet most of them are afraid to work with somebody else because they're going to lose their power, identity, and autonomy. And you know what happens when they refuse to work together? They lose their power, their identity, and their autonomy because they continue to shrink and die because no one's doing marketing or economic development. And now I want to share this with you. 522 communities last year. I took advantage of every opportunity I had to meet with site selectors, state and provincial economic development officers, agencies, anyone who would talk to me that was associated with where investment in our 2 countries went. And I discovered something. To me, it was a confirmation. I already knew this, but it became very expressed through those interviews. We all think lowering taxes is the best way to do economic development. It's a remnant left over from the 80s, I think. Or it's a remnant left over from ideological thinking. Lower taxes, business will come. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. So when I did all of that research, there are 5 factors that determine where investment goes in a community, to which communities they go to. The 5th one, the bottom of the list, was taxes. The bottom. It was barely registering for all of the people I interviewed. They actually didn't care. As long as you weren't the highest tax jurisdiction, they didn't care. Number 4 was infrastructure. Water, wastewater, roads, rail, runway. That was number 4. If you had that, then they could access markets, and that was pretty cool and pretty important. And they wanted water and wastewater hookups already to commercial lots, especially for Main Street businesses. Number 3 was housing and workforce, and they put them together. Everyone always put them together because, like I already indicated to you, your housing, the more diverse it is, the more diverse your workforce is going to be. No one can come to work there if you don't have housing, and if you don't have housing, no one's coming to work there. And again, we still think that we go wherever the lowest taxes are. That might have worked in the 80s when my parents' generation went to where the jobs were. They would move to where the jobs were, but now the jobs are moving to where people want to live. I mean, they have the option of living in a great community, so now the jobs are following them. It's why Amazon recently opened, well, not recently, it's a year and a half now, their newest location for business in Virginia. I think it's the highest tax jurisdiction in the United States, but it has a workforce and a quality of life that they were pitching, and it worked. I mean, Jeff Bezos is the cheapest man on earth, but he's still located there because it made good business sense because they had a workforce. And so when it was housing and workforce put together, that was number 3. Number 2 was quality of life. I mean, and I don't just mean quality of life like less traffic. I mean amenities and services provided by the municipality, like a walking track and a swimming pool, but also the businesses in the community. Because a lot of younger people, I got to change that. Semi-retirees and seniors too are looking for a quality living. And so if you only have one restaurant, it wasn't very appealing because we like more restaurants. We want a yoga studio. We want walking tracks. But it was businesses like the restaurants, what kind of places you got to shop in. So that's why I tell everybody you can't separate community development and economic development anymore. They go hand in hand. If me as a dad, if my town doesn't have a swimming pool and I have to drive 20 miles to a swimming pool to drop the kids off there so they can go swimming, I'll probably pick up the groceries and go to the hardware store. Likewise, though, if I only have one grocery store and I can't get what I need and I drive 20 miles down the road to get groceries, I'm probably going to drop the kids off at the pool. They go hand in hand. That's quality of life, businesses and services. So number 5 was taxes. Number 4 was infrastructure. Number 3 was housing and workforce. Number 2 was quality of life. You know what number 1 was? Collaboration and cooperation. I actually had site selectors say to me, we will send people in to school board meetings and town council meetings to see if they collaborate, to see if the Chamber of Commerce works with the town and the Downtown Economic Development Authority or the Regional Economic Development Alliance and the school board and everybody else. We will send people in and see if they work with the neighboring municipalities. One lady, she was brilliant, summed it up perfectly for me. I said, that's enlightening. She said, well, think about it. If they're not collaborating, they're not cooperating, then they're not going to have enough money to invest in a quality of life, to attract businesses and make sure they have the swimming pool and the walking track. They're not going to be able to build the housing they need or attract the workforce they need. They're not going to be able to build the infrastructure they need. And even if the taxes are low now, they'll go up. They'll go up because they're not collaborating enough to grow the pie because their egos are in the way. So collaboration and cooperation across North America is the number 1 factor that attracts investment from people, from families, from businesses, and from industries. And I found that funny, strange, because I grew up with that conservative mindset, Republican mindset for you guys, that said that lower taxes and it will attract business. But it turns out lower taxes is not the cause of business investment, it's the result of business investment. If you grow your economy by dealing with those first 4 factors, you can lower taxes. But if you try and lower taxes to begin with without a quality of life, you're not going to get a workforce, you're not going to have a quality of life, you're not going to deal with housing. So you need economic growth and then you can lower taxes, not the other way around. So collaboration and collaboration, I think, is definitely a pathway to success. Number 9, technology and innovation. It's really important that these get put together. In economic terms, technology is not wires and gadgets. Technology is a solution to a problem, which is why I put it with innovation. And there are so many interesting ways for technology and innovation to be done. There is a school, now I haven't done this research, I haven't checked on them in 5 or 6 years, so just fairness, it's a little old data, but there's a school in Chicago that is a public school, and it decided to make agriculture core to its curriculum. So a bunch of urban kids in Chicago who were having trouble functioning well, not getting good grades, not feeling like they were getting a good education. You know, Chicago has its issues. They got asked if they wanted to apply to this program. Now, they didn't take the smartest kids with the best grades. It was a lottery program. So if you got in, it was pure luck. But that didn't work as a disincentive. It actually worked as an incentive to attract kids to the program because it was pure chance. But their grades for kids coming out were amazing. And they tied to agriculture. They were teaching kids how to grow tomatoes in greenhouses, how to measure out fertilizer, and how to water plants using math. So instead of just learning how to do the curriculum, they were using agriculture to do it. And it gave them incredibly powerful inspiration. In fact, last I had checked, which is 5 or 6 years ago, it was the number 2 public school in all of Chicago. It was quite remarkable. That's not just technology, that's innovation, but that's the point. There was another community, it's Beaumont, it's one of my favorite communities. I love this place. They attracted this small bus that was autonomous. So it was an autonomous vehicle. It had no driver, and it carried about 8 or 10 passengers. There were 8 of us when I was on it. I drove all the way to go see it, just to see it, because I thought it was pretty cool. And this thing would pick people up in their neighborhoods and bring them downtown for events. Instead of bike lanes, they created, I forget the name they gave her, it was like Sarah or something. And she would pick people up and then take them downtown and go back again. Now, they missed on a bit of communication because people in the community kind of got mad and said, it's taking up a lane, I don't like this technology. But what they found after they ran it for a summer is that the company that did it celebrated what they'd done, and it helped them become better because they got to try this stuff out. They now, the CEO tells me, they get about 2 calls a week on average from new companies all over North America saying, we have a new innovative technology to help address a municipal issue. Could we try it in your community? And you know what it's doing? It's attracting a bunch of young professionals that work in the technology industry who want to be there. They can't keep up with the housing growth right now, and they can't keep up with the office space that's needed for the new technology companies that are coming to rent space, and some are staying permanently to come to their community. But it doesn't just have to be that. There's a community called Orbit, just outside of a town called Innisfil. This new community that they're developing is going, or it's an expansion on their existing community, is going to fully integrate agriculture, office space, living space, recreation space. So instead of the traditional downtown core and all the commercial stuff's over here and the industrial stuff's over there and housing goes over there, it's all going to be integrated. Kind of like something out of Star Trek or something, I think. The pictures show it. You can look it up. Orbit community outside of Innisfil, Ontario. They are already having people putting deposits down on houses that might not be built for 5 or 6 years. It's quite innovative. They're attracting new businesses that want to not only be located there, but integrate themselves into that community. And it's absolutely remarkable. So technology and innovation, finding creative solutions to problems, is a pathway to success. Number 10, a community neighborhood feel. I hope, I don't mean to offend anybody here. I heard lots of people talk about rural. I heard lots of people in side conversations, they talked about small towns. Now, look, I used to say all the time, I love my small town. But I want you to think about what message that sends to people. Small town. We did some research about small towns. Sorry. Now I'm going to finally need to have a drink. Talking for 2 hours is too much. There we go. So we did some research about what people thought about small towns. And when we talked to the general public and we said small town and asked them to describe it, they said words like potholes, cow smell, no internet, nowhere to shop, no restaurants. That's the way they described it. But then we got another group together, comparable group. We did this several times. And when we asked them to describe what a neighborhood or a community is like, they said people helping each other. They said connectivity, friendly spaces, kids playing in the streets. Small town and community are exactly the same thing. And when we say small town, we mean the community. But when we say small town, it sends a message to everybody else about what you don't have rather than the message you want to portray, which is what you actually have. So think about that, the language that you use. And instead of talking about small town, because I deliberately didn't put it there, talk about community or neighborhood feel. So if you're going to create a community or neighborhood feel, I suggest that you do things that really build the community. Here's what I mean, okay? If I asked you to define what a community is, describe it in point form, because we've done these experiments too, these analysis, people say things like a downtown, businesses, roads, a school, a hospital, housing. You know what that stuff is? Stuff. It's stuff. Most dimensions, when you talk about a community, it leaves out the people. And so what a community really is a group of people that have a common goal, a common agenda, and they support each other in achieving the same goals. That's a community. That's what you want your small town community neighborhood to feel. A place where people belong. It doesn't matter what kind of, you can have a community without a school. You can have a community without a hospital. You can have a community without housing, without a downtown, you can do without all those things. So the physical infrastructure we're always so focused on misses the point about a real community and what it is. It's about connections, bonding between people, trying to achieve a common goal. Now, so that means you need to break down some of those barriers. I ask people this same question all the time, and it was brought up earlier, so it's perfect. In a group of an audience where there's like 2,000 people, I'll say, how many of you would say your community is a welcoming community? Every time, half the people in the audience put up their hand. And I look at the ones that didn't, and I say, you should be ashamed. And they all nod like, yeah, I know. And then I look at the rest of them and say, and you're a bunch of liars. Because you know what? We're friendly. That's what we mean. We're a friendly community. If someone, right, the whole finger wave. We were talking, finger, hi. Sometimes you wave to people, you're like, I didn't know that person. Oh, whatever. They ask you where the restaurant is or where the swimming pool is or where, we're friendly. We tell them, we're polite. We're nice people. That's way different than being welcoming. The average community has each of us personally belong to almost 100 communities on average. I live in Ardrossan. That's my community. 600 people. 700, 600 people. But I also belong to a community of consultants. I don't like any of them, but right, I belong to them. No, I'm just joking. They're okay. I belong to a community of dads who have sons that play soccer. I belong to a community of dads who also have sons that do art. I belong to a community of people who like to go on the walking trails in my town of Ardrossan. I don't know their names. I know all their dogs' names. They know my dogs' names. It's right. But we're kind of a community. If they didn't see me on the walking trails every couple of weeks, they might stop by my house and say, is everything okay? We haven't seen what was being my dog in a while. They wouldn't ask about me, but you know what I mean? And so if you're new to the community, and the further outside you come, the harder it is to break into those communities. I mean, even I'm from Canada. Like, hockey is our religion. I never got to play hockey because as soon as my feet could reach the pedals on the farm, that was it. I couldn't play hockey. My brother got to, I didn't get to. I still feel uncomfortable going in a hockey arena. I'm thinking someone's going to pull my sweater over my head and start. I don't. And I feel like they look at me like, yeah, you don't belong here. You don't play hockey and you can't skate. Like, you're right. Let me out of here. But my wife is Portuguese. Our boys played soccer. I'm comfortable with that. Imagine someone coming from across the country, across the state, or across the world to your community, and we say, you can play organized sports, just sign up. I don't think that they would. We need to break down some of those barriers. So I've seen communities that say, we're going to have pickup sports. That green space we have, come and play football. And not just open, they say, we're going to have free hot dogs for everybody, for the kids. And they knock on the door and say, hey, community event, come on out. Let's play some football. That's what we're doing. And bring them into the community with pop-up sports that aren't organized and professional and expensive. They're just pop-up sports. I've seen even more welcoming communities say, you know what, instead of us coming to play your sport, why don't we have a day next Saturday where you show us what sport you play? We'll help you get the equipment and stuff. We'd like to learn, right? I mean, how many times do we sit there and say, I always use the Filipino community because they seem to be in so many small communities and they're so hardworking and such a wonderful group. How many communities have a Filipinos Day where you get to learn what they eat, what their religion is, how they value things, what kind of sports they play? I mean, being a welcoming community isn't taking an outsider who already feels uncomfortable and saying if they wanted to integrate, they would do it. Instead, we should go approach them. That's creating a neighborhood community feel. There was sorry, how am I doing for time? I'm way more talkative than I'm supposed to be, aren't I? Okay, all right. Okay, less than 10 minutes. So here we go. This is going to be really fast. A great community that I had the pleasure of working in was Benson. The community of Benson, it's in Minnesota. 2,500 people. They said, Doug, we've lost a major taxpayer. And so we've got millions of dollars that we've been given to play with to try and reinvent our economy. That's what we're trying to do. They were giving $700,000 a year to the golf course so it would stay open. They gave $100,000 loans to a couple of businesses. One of them was a Mexican restaurant that had flooding in the basement. And they said, you know what, as long as you stay open for 10 years, you don't have to repay it. They had everything going. They had housing that was affordable and quality and not expensive. They had a robust main street with lots of businesses. They had manufacturers around the outside of town, and yet the manufacturers couldn't grow. The housing, the little bit that was left for inventory, wasn't moving. No new businesses locating. Said, economic development isn't working here. We need some help. So I took my colleague Heather with me, and I tell this story because it shows why we need more diversity, which is the next slide, in our thinking. We met with small manufacturers, seniors, and semi-retirees. We met with parents. We met with everybody who would talk to us. We met with hundreds of people over the course of almost a week. And I didn't see it. We got to the school, and they had told us how they had a new bond, so they were building a brand new big school. They were so excited about that. The bond issue passed. They were so excited. We got to the school, and we had a few minutes before I was going to go talk to the kids, and they said, want to see the daycare? So we went down some rickety old stairs into the basement. And there was a small room with two women who were way overworked, making $7.50 an hour. Heather remembers the exact numbers. And they had a bunch of babies there. While I was there, a young woman came in and said, you have to take my baby. My cesarean stitch is ripped and I have to go to work still, so you have to. And that was, Heather was crying. I was okay, but that's because So I said, I got to go. I'm going to go upstairs and speak to the kids. We went, I came back. By the time I'd come back, Heather had crafted a solution. With a new school being built, her proposal to the town was, you should build a large daycare with lots of light, really colorful. If you're going to subsidize anything, subsidize their wages, because if you worked at the grocery store, you got $14.50 an hour. At the daycare, you got $7.50. Subsidize their wages, give them quality training so it's a quality daycare, and say, if you live in this community, you have access. It wasn't free, it wasn't subsidized, it was just access. And we did the proposal to the town, and the town looked at us and said, that's not economic development. So we left. Now, the person who owned the newspaper liked the idea and kept pitching it, and eventually the school board came to that community and said, I'll tell you what, we'll build the daycare in addition on the school as long as you provide the staff, pay them, and train them. That's not our specialty. So you do that. And they agreed. And now I have been told that in that community, they have new developers building new housing because it's all sold out. New young people are moving to that community to take on the new manufacturing jobs, and the community is growing economically. And the reason why I tell you this story is because I still have people that look at me and say, that's not economic development. But when I spoke in Las Vegas at the National Association of County Administrators or County Officers, NACO, I spoke there, and then I had to have a meeting with a representative from each of your 50 states after, and I did the presentation and talked about that community. And a couple of the other state representatives looked at me and laughed and said, that's not economic development. And the Minnesota state representative stood up and said, damn right it is. In fact, it works so well in that community, we've incorporated daycare into our statewide economic development strategy. Social issues are daycare. And you know what? Every single person after that Heather talked to said it's because it became a neighborhood and it had a community feel. That's what drew us in. It provided a service that we need. So that's a pathway forward. Number 11, diversity, growth, and celebration. How did I think I did the wrong slide. Well, look at that. I'm going to add diversity, growth, and celebration, Filipino days, bringing in new people. I'm going to tell you something, though. We have a tendency, when we do consulting with the community, we have a list of 60 types of people that we want to be heard from. Because if we give it to council and say, find us 20 people to interview, they call their friends. It's not a bad thing. It's just habit. We talk to who we know. So we actually ask for the newest person to move to the community from another country. We asked for a young person that went away and never came back. We asked for a young person that went to university, went away for a while, then did come back. We asked for a teacher, a preacher, a doctor, dentist. We asked for diversity because you need a diversity of opinions in order to make better decisions. And celebrating that for days like a Filipinos Days or a cultural days where you can celebrate that language is incredibly important. Our young generation has grown up online. I mean, when we were going to Portugal last year, because we hadn't been back in like 12 years, we told the boys who are 17 and 14 now, we're going to Portugal. They planned the whole trip. They did it all online. They knew where we were going. In fact, my youngest learned how to speak a lot of Portuguese before we even went because they're used to different foods, to different cultures. They're used to seeing it. Even if they don't live it in your community, they see it online. And so you can no longer just have, well, in Canada, I don't know if you guys have this, the only restaurant that's the Western Chinese cuisine restaurant. There's always one in every town. You can get the chow mein and a hot hamburger at the same time. It's pretty cool. But you know what? Younger people want diversity. And so celebrating that diversity, not just having it, but growing it and celebrating it is incredibly important. But when you're trying to engage other people, I don't care if it's youth or if it's an immigrant population or if it's someone from across the state, when they feel like an outsider, here's a rule. You have got to ask them 7 times before they believe you're serious about getting involved. You have to ask them 7 times. There's actually a psychological condition that is demonstrated that if you hear something 7 times, you start to believe it. We've all heard that. We've all had the experience. You hear something in the morning and you're like, there is no way that is true. Not a chance. Then you hear it at 10 o'clock. Then you hear it at the beginning of lunch. Then you hear it at the end of lunch. Then you hear it at 2 o'clock. Then you hear it at 4 o'clock. By the time you get home and your spouse looks at you and says, did you hear? You're like, yeah, I think that might be true. I mean, no new information and nothing changed, but you heard it 7 times and now you start to believe it. It's why politicians repeat themselves over and over and over, because you start to believe it when you've heard it that many times. So when you're saying you want to be involved in an organization, you've got to ask them. Then the next time at the pancake breakfast, you have to go sit with them and ask them again. Then you have to ask them when you see them on the street. And then you have to ask them what they would do with the organization. Like give them some power, give them some control. Keep it up 7 times meaningfully, and they'll start to believe you want them to be involved, and they'll come out of their shell. Number 12, marketing and communication. This is about your story. 2 things please don't ever do. 1, don't ever do this. I go to communities all the time, and I hate hearing when people go, we're the best kept secret. Why are you keeping it a secret? What is wrong with you? Don't keep it a secret. So don't keep it a secret. You need to tell the story, your story. Number 2, the most marketing I see many communities do is a billboard at the edge of town and it says lots for sale. I always ask myself, lots of what? Like I can see a stand-up comedic group doing this skit as they approach town. She says, oh, look, hon, lots for sale. And he says, oh, yeah, that's great, lots. She looks at him and goes, lots of what? She says, I don't know. I can hear the skit in my head. It's Monty Python to a T. And yet so many communities say lots for sale. That's not marketing. No one's driving around waiting for a bare lot. You've got to tell the story about who you are, but that's why you need to focus on what makes you unique and then make sure you communicate it appropriately. And there's two things about communication I want to emphasize. One, there is external marketing and communication, which is incredibly important. Target your market to who is going to be interested in your community. Don't buy a billboard for $100,000 a month that says, hey, we're here. Don't buy an advertisement in a newspaper that says, hey, we're here. I was in a community, the Toronto Star, our biggest city with our biggest newspaper, they said, our marketing efforts aren't working. And so I went to that community to help, and they opened the newspaper, and they had bought a postcard-size ad, and it had the name of their community with their phone number and email, and their slogan, which happened to be the best place to work, live, and raise a family. And that was it. I said, so what are you selling? And they looked at the ad, well, oh yeah, we didn't tell any story. We just gave them our contact information. You've got to make sure you tell the story, not the facts. I mean, there's a community in Saskatchewan we worked with, and they had our story on their website. It sounded like a work camp in the oil patch. It was all about, it's an affordable place to live with 500 vacant units, and you can get a good job. We've got commercial space, and it gave the listing and the size, and they had an 11.2% commercial tax rate. And it was like, does anybody want to live here? Like, you guys have written this, like, there's no story that says there's a quality of life, that there's a reason to live here, that you can own a business, that you can raise a family. Like, pick your story and tell it really well. The other side of it, though, isn't just external, it's also internal marketing. I have said this 100 times, if I've said it once. We used a statistician from the University of Alberta to help us, and he said it's a factor of 20. Take the population of your community and multiply it by 20. That is your direct marketing. It takes out kids and duplicates and relatives and gets right down to your direct marketing communication. So if you have 50,000 people in this region, multiplied by 20, it's 1 million people that you can reach with direct marketing. Now, this is why internal communication and marketing is so important, because we're always telling the rest of the world about us. You've got 50,000 people in a region to tell the story for you. And if the state of Kansas gave you $1 million to market your community, and everyone in that community is saying, there's no hope, there's no opportunities here, this town is dying, there's no reason to invest here, $1 million won't change the story. But if everyone in your community is saying, think about the opportunities we have and why people would want to live here, the new innovations we're having with agriculture and the quality of life we have in our communities, and the fact that we have real neighborhoods, not just rural, but real neighborhoods that are safe, where we're connected, and they're all telling that story, you don't need $1 million from the state of Kansas, because you will have 1 million people reached with that story. And most of us are focused on external communication and telling the world, but if our own people can't share the story, or their story is undermining the one we're trying to market, then it's a waste of time. So this is the pathway forward. And the last one, own it. And I mean, seriously, you just need to own it. I am so frustrated by how many times I hear people say, the country won't help us, the state won't help us. I was just doing a call with in Minnesota. And one of the mayor of one of the 5 communities on that call, after I was done presenting and talking about pathways forward, said, well, you know what? We're a mining community. We're a mining region. We can't get any help from the state. They listen to the environmentalists. We've lost 8,000 mining jobs, which, by the way, wasn't due to environmentalism. It was due to the change in mining and the automation of it. And he said, I actually tell people, young people in this community, you need to go to Minneapolis if you want a life. I looked at him and said, see, you're exactly the kind of guy that's going to do that for 20 years and then wonder why you got exactly what you told people to do. You need to own the solution. There's nothing the state can do or the country can do to help you. And if they do, I'm sorry, they're probably going to create some government grant that's going to tell you expressly what you need to do. So that's not your solution, that's their solution. And it's a generic solution that's probably not going to work. But they'll feel better because they announced, $22 million in government funding to help small towns. And you're all going to do the same thing, and nobody's going to get any change or results. I tell people all the time, money is the last step in a solution. You're very lucky to have a foundation and the Innovation Center that help allow you to find your solution and then fund it. But most government programs fund it and tell you what solution you're going to apply. That's not a solution. That's a program to run your feet off to get some government grants. You need to decide you're going to do something different, and you need to start small. I don't care what it is. Pick one thing to do right, to do well, and the rest will start to come. One more story. Lancaster, Pennsylvania is one of my favorite communities to talk about. I didn't tell you this, right? No, okay. Lancaster, Pennsylvania is in the Rust Belt. So it's suffering because it lost its coal industry and its steel industry, just like so many other communities in the Rust Belt. So this wasn't a deliberate plan, but they just figured we need to find something. And they owned it. They said, no one's coming to save us, so what are we going to do? And they said, well, we've got a lot of semi-retirees and older people here because all the young people left. They weren't inheriting the 3-generation or 4-generation of steel and coal jobs because they were gone. So they left. So they had an older population. And they said, well, let's help the older population. That's all they did. And they said, where are we going to start? So they started by calling grocery stores and said, hey, you know what? We've got a lot of underemployed high school students that are looking for part-time jobs. What if we fund it for a little bit? We'll pay the high school students to deliver groceries to seniors. They can call in their order. They'll deliver it. How would you like that? And the grocery store said, sounds like a great plan. We want to help. The seniors loved it. They loved it. They bragged about it. So then they said, what else could we do? So they converted a bunch of their bike lanes and extra lanes to, because they asked the seniors what they wanted, golf cart lanes. So, you know, from the time the snow came to the time the snow left, I mean, they could drive their golf carts. That's the rule. But they can go between neighborhoods and go between golf courses, and they loved it. That was great. It was exciting. And then they opened up more markets for the seniors, more social experiences for the seniors. They even then asked the seniors, what else do you want? And you know what they said? Pickleball. They said, we don't play tennis, we want pickleball. So they converted a bunch of the tennis courts to pickleball courts. And last I heard, right before the pandemic, they were going to have the world's pickleball championship. Sorry, you guys, we laugh at you because you always have the world's this, but you're the only ones invited. You never, except for hockey and baseball, but so we always laugh. The World Series, we get one Canadian team. And we're horrible. So we laugh. But they were going to have the World Pickleball Championship. And now I understand they're going to bring that back. And the seniors loved it. Now, they didn't have any anticipation this was going to help them out. Not one bit. But all those seniors would leave Lancaster, Pennsylvania in the wintertime. And where did they go? California, Florida, Arizona, right? And they told all the other seniors, look at what my town's doing for me. This is fantastic. And the other seniors looked at them and said, well, my town's not doing anything for me. We'll come and see you this summer and see what it's like. And so they came to visit. And then they started to move there because their kids were gone all over the place. They said, let's move there. And so their population grew with seniors moving there. In the summer, they ran out of housing. So new developers showed up to build the seniors appropriate housing they needed. But they also needed regular housing for all the tradespeople that came because of the developers that were building. And so it started to grow and it started to change and transform. So they invested in their main street and their downtown, which attracted young people to come down and open up businesses for this booming population of tradespeople and contractors and developers and semi-retirees. And now they've turned their economy around so much so that Lancaster, Pennsylvania has the most robust young professionals association in the entire Midwest, the Rust Belt. It's been quite remarkable. They only focused on one thing, and the only thing, they didn't know it was going to be successful, but they said, we need to do something about this. No one is coming to save us. And granted, they still have some problems with some crime and development. No place is perfect. None of the ones I talked about are perfect, but all of them are making progress. And every single community that I've talked about all day today that's being successful is being successful because they owned it. They said, we're going to do something. So find one thing. In the book, do the 2-list exercise. Start with small things. It doesn't matter, but you got to start with something because no one is coming to save you. And yet, building community is the single most important job on earth, and our communities are worth saving. So let's get to it.